Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to share some things I've learned over the years related to starting issues with the 2020 and up Yamaha YZ250FX. This information will also apply to the 2019 and up Yamaha YZ250F. I've been riding and racing a YZ250FX since 2021, and between my 2021 model and my 2023 model, I've got over 300 hours of experience with these bikes. I've also got several friends with these bikes, so some of what I'll share here was gained from collective knowledge as well. Overall, these bikes start very quickly and reliably, but there are just a few things you need to understand to avoid issues and frustration. Let's start by discussing cold starting and fouled plugs. If you have a 2020 YZ250FX, there is a technical bulletin from Yamaha to reprogram the ECU. This is only for the 2020 year model YZ250FX. If you haven't already, you need to get a Yamaha dealer to do this update. This requires a special programming tool and cannot be done in the GYTR app. I've included a link to the technical bulletin in the video description. I'm making this video in 2024, so I think the vast majority of the 2020 bikes have been updated, but I'm mentioning this as it might be still relevant for someone. Assuming that update has been done or you have a 2021 and up, there can still be cold starting and plug fouling issues. These bikes run very rich when they're cold, and that's important to understand. The fuel injection system is injecting a very fuel-rich mixture when you first start up the bike. When you start the bike cold, it's critical that the engine doesn't stumble and die. This is the most common fouled plug scenario. The bike fires up but stumbles, dies, and then won't start again. Another fouled plug scenario is when you start it up cold, let it run briefly, and then turn it off. Here's how to avoid these scenarios. Use the cold start button when starting the bike cold, especially if the outside temperature is lower than 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Using the cold start button will increase the RPM when the bike first starts up and prevent it from stumbling and dying. Increasing your idle setting to 2500 RPM will also help prevent the bike from stumbling and dying when cold starting. Increasing your idle also has some other benefits I'll discuss later in the video. Do not start your bike and then turn it off before the engine fully warms up. Anytime you start your bike, you need to let it warm up to operating temperature before you turn it off. When I say operating temperature, I mean coolant temp needs to be at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Resist the urge to start it up in the garage, give it a couple of revs, and then turn it off. This is a recipe for a fouled plug. Never start your bike cold for brief periods. Once a bike is fully warmed up on a ride, it's okay to start and stop for brief periods, but never when the engine's cold. I've got a friend that showed up to a ride once and his bike wouldn't start due to a fouled plug. While we were changing the plug, he said, "It started up fine this morning." I said, "Wait, you started it before you got here?" He said, "Yeah, I started at home for a second before leaving to make sure it was going to start." It all made sense at that point. This is a really common way that people foul plugs with these bikes, and changing the plug is a lot of work, so always warm up your bike fully when starting it. Now let's talk about hot starts. There are a couple of hot start scenarios I'll talk about. The first being hot starts in gear with the clutch in, and then hot starts in neutral. If you're having trouble with hot starts while the bike is in gear with the clutch in, like hair scramble dead starts for example, there are a few issues to talk about. Clutch drag is a common problem with Yamaha stock clutches. Combine this with a relatively small starter and the stock 4-cell battery, and it can be a bad combination for hot starting when in gear. Yamaha clutches drag when new, but the baskets develop grooves and notches very quickly as well, making the problem worse over time. The best solution is to install a high-quality aftermarket clutch and clutch basket, but that's an expensive option. If you want to stick with the stock clutch components, the first thing you need to do is check your free play at the lever. Set it to the minimum setting so when you pull in your lever, you're fully disengaging the clutch. Here's a tip that will help you reduce clutch drag and hair scramble dead starts when using the stock Yamaha clutch or any manual clutch. When on the starting line, start the bike in neutral when the row in front of you leaves. With the bike running, pull the clutch in, put the bike in gear. Now with the clutch still in, give the bike a few revs to break the clutch friction. Keep holding the clutch in, let the bike idle, then kill it. Keep holding the clutch in and don't let it back out until you start your race. The stock battery is lithium, but it's a relatively low power 4-cell battery with only a 2.4 amp hour capacity. If that battery is not perfectly maintained, it can really struggle with in-gear starts. Upgrading to an 8 or a 12-cell battery will help tremendously with in-gear starts, but it will not completely overcome clutch drag if you haven't corrected that issue. I'll include a link to my favorite battery in the video description. I've used Henson clutches in my bikes before, and I'm currently running a Recluse Radius CX. These are both outstanding solutions to the stock clutch drag issue, but they are pricey. I'll talk more about that a little later in the video. Another common suggestion I've heard numerous times is to slightly turn the throttle when starting. Some have even suggested that these marks on the throttle housing were put there for that purpose. Those marks are actually for the purpose of setting throttle cable free play, but if those marks help you with a consistent starting sequence, then go for it. However, I approach this differently. Instead of slightly turning the throttle, I prefer to raise the idle to 2500. This effectively does the same thing, but it doesn't require you to concentrate on a specific throttle position. Upping your idle setting to 2500 can help you avoid cold start issues, but will also help with these in-gear hot start situations. For hair scramble dead starts, I found that these bikes are very sensitive to the coolant temperature. I spent a lot of time dialing this in on both of my bikes, and I found that the engine starts the quickest when the coolant temp is between 150 and 160 degrees. Getting the bike in this temperature range when starting helps with hair scramble dead starts. You can get a feel for this by touching your radiator as the bike comes up to temp. Don't touch your radiator when you've been riding your bike, or if your bike's already warmed up, you may get burned. But I've gotten pretty good at warming up my bike until I can feel the heat in the radiator through my glove and know when it's in the right range. This takes practice at home. Over the past few years, I've been able to get very quick hair scramble starts on my YZ250FX by applying the information I'm sharing here. One of the main advantages I found is the Recluse Radius CX clutch. In the past, I was never really a fan of auto clutches, but I saw the advantage with a couple of my friends who were using them to get better hair scramble starts. The Recluse Radius CX completely resolves the clutch drag issue in the YZ250FX. For hair scramble dead starts, I don't need to touch my clutch lever at all. I just hit the start button, and as soon as the engine starts, I twist the throttle. This clutch, combined with the AG801 battery, proper coolant temp, and 2500 idle setting, have allowed me to get very quick, very consistent hair scramble starts. This is an expensive clutch option for the bike, but for me it's worth it. Let's move on to talk about hot starting when in neutral. If you're having issues with hot starts in neutral, you could have a weak starter, a weak battery, or your valve clearances could be too tight. This is less common among the Yamaha starting issues, but it can happen. I made a video on how to check and shim valves, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. Now, I've probably given out too much information in this video, but I get a lot of questions about starting these bikes, so I decided to share. You can support this channel by subscribing, hitting the like button, leaving a comment, or using my Amazon affiliate links in the video description. Thanks for watching.